I marked my line in the dirt. They crossed it once. Big mistake. Cross it again, and they won't just answer to me. They'll answer for every inch of land they disrespected. Tell the HOA I don't do warnings. I do consequences. That's what I told myself the morning everything started. Out here, a property line isn't paint on a map. It's a promise. And folks who break promises in this part of the country usually regret it faster than they can say, "We meant no harm." I've lived on this land my whole life. 160 acres of cedar, dust, mesquite, and memories. My mother used to say the soil out here remembers everything. Every boot that ever touched it, every fence post that ever held a line straight, every drought, every storm, every prayer whispered into the wind. You don't push a man off soil like that. Not without waking something in him he hasn't had to use in a long, long time. The sun had barely rolled over the ridge when I walked out to the gate and found it. A single envelope wedged between two old cedar slats. No stamp, no handwriting, no footprint in the gravel, just an envelope. Plain, light, almost polite. Inside was a printed message, 12 words. Serenity Ridge Phase 4 cannot proceed unless the Marston parcel is vacated. Then two more. Step aside. That was it. No explanation, no apology for trespassing, no signature to answer for any of it. Just step aside. As if my home were a coat tossed over a chair, as if my land didn't hold my father's sweat or my mother's footsteps, as if the soil would simply forget who it belonged to the moment someone else's money touched it. I stood there a long while, turning that note between my fingers, feeling the weight of something that wasn't printed on the page. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a threat. No, it was the sound a rattlesnake makes before you ever see its head. You learn a lot living long enough on open land. Threats aren't loud. They don't shout. They come quiet, smooth, like a knife sliding out of its sheath. After a bit, I walked the fence line, slow, steady, nothing looked disturbed. Ground was clean, no tire tracks, no boot marks, no sign of who'd slipped close enough to leave that envelope. Whoever had done it knew how to move without being seen. Too quiet for comfort. There are only two kinds of people who walk without leaving marks: hunters and thieves. By the time I reached the back pasture, the sun had burned off the chill. Should have been a peaceful day. Fix a hinge, check the cattle, maybe patch some wire I'd been putting off. But the letter had changed the air, made it thin, sharp, uneasy. And those two little words kept circling in my mind. Step aside, like hell I would. I've seen men pushed off their land. Good men, quiet men, men who could work a week straight without ever complaining, and I've seen the look they carry afterward. That hollow one, like someone reached inside and scooped out the part that made them stand tall. They didn't just lose dirt, they lost the piece of themselves that anchored them to the world. No HOA, no developer, no board of community harmony was ever going to do that to me. Not while I still had breath, boots, and a fence line with my name carved into every cedar post. Standing there with that envelope in my hand, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not anger, not fear, a decision. If someone wanted this land badly enough to slip a message onto it in the dark, then someone was about to learn just how hard a man fights when the ground under his feet is the only thing keeping him standing. And the real kicker, I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. The next morning should have felt like any other. Quiet, steady, predictable the way country life tends to be. But ever since that envelope showed up, the land felt different, like it had shifted its weight while I wasn't looking. I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been standing on my dirt long enough to make the ground hold its breath. A little after 9, while I was working the hinge on the south gate, I heard something that didn't belong. Not cattle, not wind, not the rusty rumble of an old ranch truck on the county road. It was humming, low, mechanical, precise. I wiped the sweat from my brow and leaned out just far enough to see over the fence. 3 men stood on the other side of the property line, neatly dressed, boots too clean, clipboards, laser rangefinders, the kind of tools honest ranchers don't ever need unless they're fixing something someone else broke. They didn't wave, didn't ask permission, didn't even pretend they were sightseeing. One of them raised a handheld device, little red dot flickering across my fence like someone window shopping for what ain't theirs. Another bent down to place an orange survey flag right at the edge of my gravel. That flag wasn't on their side of the line. It was dead center on mine. I set the wrench down slow. A man who moves quick looks nervous. A man who moves slow looks sure. "Morning," I called out. Not a single one turned. That told me everything I needed to know. Folks around here aren't rude. Even strangers will tip their hat at a passing dog, let alone a man whose land they're standing beside. These weren't locals. These weren't neighbors. These were people who believed they had authority, or were paid by people who did. After a minute, the tallest one finally spoke, without looking up from his device. "Boundary verification for Serenity Ridge development. Shouldn't take long." I stepped closer to the fence. "What boundary?" He tapped his clipboard like he was bored. "Phase 4 expansion, future alignment, standard procedure." Future alignment? There's a phrase only a bureaucrat could love. I leaned both arms on the fence and stared at him until he had no choice but to look back. His eyes flickered, just a little, like he'd suddenly realized I wasn't part of whatever script he rehearsed that morning. "This land ain't Serenity Ridge," I said, "and it sure as hell ain't for sale." The shortest one cleared his throat, almost apologetic. "We're just mapping what the HOA approved." Approved? By who? I scanned their equipment: commercial-grade survey tripod, GPS receiver, and a fresh drone case. Not a cheap one either, one of those high-zoom mapping rigs you'd use when planning where to put roads. They wouldn't bring that kind of gear unless they thought that they had a right to be here, or unless someone had lied to them. "Gentlemen," I said quietly, "you're standing awful close to a fence that hasn't moved in 60 years. The tallest man gave a polite half-smile, the kind lawyers use right before they tell you you're wrong in language fancy enough to sound respectful. "We're within public right-of-way, sir. Anything visible from here is subject to assessment." There it was, the word, assessment. People don't assess land unless they plan to do something with it. Things like paving, building, condemning, replacing what's already there with something someone richer wants more. I watched them for a long while, me saying nothing, them pretending not to care that I was staring holes clean through them. Eventually, they packed up their gear and walked back to a white SUV parked a little too close to my driveway for comfort. No county markings, no contractor decals. Just a brand new white SUV with tinted windows and temporary plates. Right before the driver closed his door, I heard one of them say, "If he doesn't move, Phase 4 dies." He didn't whisper it. He wasn't scared of me hearing. That's what got under my skin. Men who aren't scared of being heard are either very stupid or very sure someone else is backing them. They drove off in a cloud of dust, leaving my fence line too quiet. I stood there long after their taillights vanished, letting the weight of those words sink in. No one had asked me about Phase 4. No one had told me anything about expansion, no legal notice, no survey request, nothing. And yet here they were, measuring what wasn't theirs, planning what they couldn't have, speaking like my land was already penciled into someone else's blueprint. The envelope had been the whisper. This was the first footstep, and deep down, I knew more were coming. 2 days passed after the surveyors showed up, and I kept telling myself it might have been a misunderstanding. Folks make mistakes, maps get mixed up, boundaries get drawn wrong by someone who's never stepped foot on the land they're drawing. But deep down, I knew better. The envelope, the survey crew, the way they spoke like decisions had already been made. I'd seen storms roll in before, slow, dark, quiet. This one had the same smell. It was on the third morning that trouble finally knocked on my door, except this time, it didn't bother hiding behind an envelope. A shiny black truck pulled up the driveway, tires too polished for ranch roads, chrome sparkling like it was auditioning for a commercial. The driver stepped out, khaki slacks, crisp shirt, hair gelled back like he'd never met wind stronger than a ceiling fan. He smiled the way city men smile when they're nervous but want to look confident. "Mr. Marston?" he asked, extending a hand. I didn't shake it. "Depends who's asking." He pulled a business card from his breast pocket. "Name's Carter Mills. I represent Horizon Vista Developments. We're working with the HOA on the new Serenity Ridge expansion. Thought I'd come by and talk opportunity." Opportunity. That word should have come with a warning label. He walked up my porch steps like he'd been invited, and I let him, mostly to see how far he'd get before losing his balance. City shoes don't do well on old wood. "Beautiful land you've got here," he said, looking around like a man shopping for furniture. "Untouched, private. Ideal for Phase 4's Greenbelt Transition Zone." Greenbelt Transition Zone, the kind of phrase people invent when they want to take something without admitting they're taking it. Phase 4 doesn't involve my land, I said. He chuckled softly. Well, technically, not yet. I didn't like that yet. He slid a manila folder across my porch table. Inside were glossy renderings, curved roads, cul-de-sacs, walking trails, a decorative pond, all of it sitting exactly where my north pasture was supposed to be. So, let's talk numbers, Mr. Marston, he said, tapping the folder. We've already secured commitments from buyers. Investors are excited, and the HOA board has signed preliminary agreements regarding boundary adjustments. I froze. Boundary adjustments? I asked, voice low enough to make the wood creak. He nodded like it was nothing. Oh, it's standard. They've conditionally approved Phase 4's outline. It's all pending final acquisition of... He flipped a page. The Marston parcel. He said it casually, like he was reading a grocery list. What acquisition? I asked. He blinked. Well, the one the HOA agreed to facilitate. Facilitate what exactly? Carter hesitated for the first time, a thin crack in his salesman confidence. They informed us negotiations were in progress. That was when my stomach dropped, not because I was scared, but because I knew exactly what had happened. They hadn't just planned Phase 4. They hadn't just mapped it. They hadn't just measured it. They had already sold it, on paper, with signatures, contracts, deadlines. Sold land they didn't own, sold my land. Carter must have taken my silence as consideration, because he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a pristine contract, tabbed, highlighted, ready for signatures. We're prepared to offer you well above market value, he said. Enough to move wherever you'd like. New start, clean exit, no hassle. I pushed the contract back toward him. My land's not for sale. He kept smiling, but the corners of his eyes tightened. Mr. Marston, the HOA has already allocated funds. Investors expect progress. There's time pressure. Not my time, I said, and not my pressure. He swallowed hard. This project collapses if we can't secure this parcel. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair, sounds like you bought something somebody else didn't have the right to sell. His face paled. For a moment the wind stopped, leaving the porch dead quiet. Carter cleared his throat. I strongly encourage you to reconsider. The board is determined to make Phase 4 happen. They're motivated. Motivated. There was another word that should have come with a warning. I stood up slowly. Conversation's over. He backed away, trying not to look rattled. I'll tell the HOA you declined. Good, I said, and tell them this. Next time they want to sell land that's mine, they better bring the deed with them. He drove off faster than a salesman ought to drive on gravel. And as that dust cloud drifted behind him, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad paperwork. This wasn't accidental. The HOA had crossed my line, and they'd done it wearing someone else's money like armor. The envelope had been the whisper. The survey crew had been the first footstep. But Carter Mills? He was the declaration of war. Carter had barely been gone 24 hours when the next wave came. This time not quietly, not politely, and definitely not pretending. Late afternoon sun lay flat across the pasture, turning everything gold. Normally it's the hour when the world softens a little, when the wind cools and a man can sit on his porch with a cold tea and remember why life out here is worth the trouble. Not that day. I heard the engines before I saw the dust. 3 vehicles, all rolling slow, steady, deliberate, like they weren't just arriving, they were advancing. A white SUV led the way. HOA emblem slapped on the door like it meant something. Behind it came a second SUV and a little silver sedan that looked too fragile to be out on dirt roads. When they stopped at my gate, doors opened in stiff unison. Out stepped 4 people, 3 I didn't recognize. One I'd only seen in HOA newsletters I never asked for. Darlene Hargrove, president of the Serenity Ridge HOA. Her pictures never showed how tall she was, or how cold, or how her smile came preloaded with disappointment. She walked toward my gate like she expected it to open itself out of respect. It didn't. Mr. Marston, she called, voice sharp as a fence staple. We need to speak with you. I stayed on the porch, arms resting on my knees. If it's about selling my land, conversation's already over. She didn't flinch. People like her don't hear words they don't want to hear. We're here, she said, to address your non-cooperation with the development plan. Non-cooperation. Amazing word choice. like I'd agreed to something but forgot to show up. "What development plan?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "Phase 4. You've been informed." "I got an envelope telling me to step aside," I said. "If that's your idea of informing, you're doing a lousy job." One of the men stepped forward, a thick-necked guy with a clipped mustache and a badge-shaped patch reading Community Safety Officer. Not sheriff, not deputy, just a uniform someone ordered online. "We're authorized to conduct preliminary safety evaluations," he announced. "This gate obstructs emergency access." That made me laugh, just once, very quietly. "This gate's been here longer than your subdivision," I said. "If it wasn't a safety issue for 30 years, it ain't one today." Darlene raised a manicured hand to silence him. "Mr. Marston," she said, shifting into a patronizing tone I imagine she used on people she thought were beneath her. "We can resolve this amicably, but you need to understand, your parcel has been designated for community integration." "Integration?" I repeated. "That's a mighty fancy way of saying we want to take it." "It's not taking," she insisted. "It's transitioning. The HOA has approved boundary realignment pending your cooperation." "There's that word again," I said. "Cooperation." Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I saw it. The desperation under her polished veneer. She wasn't confident, she wasn't calm, she was cornered, and cornered people make foolish decisions. "It would be in your best interest," she said slowly, "not to obstruct the progress of this community." I stood, not fast, not dramatic, just enough for all four of them to take a step back they didn't mean to take. "My land," I said, "is not your community, and your progress stops at my fence." The safety officer puffed up. "You refusing an HOA directive, sir?" "I'm not in your HOA." His face twitched. He wasn't used to hearing that. Darlene took a breath, steadying herself. "The HOA," she said carefully, "has the authority to petition the county for condemnation if a property poses structural, environmental, or safety risks to the surrounding neighborhood." There it was. The snake finally opened its mouth. "So that's the plan," I said. "You sabotage something on my land, call it a safety hazard, and take it." She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She didn't have to. Silence is the loudest truth in the world. "We'll be in contact," she said, signaling her people. They turned back to their vehicles, walking stiff, angry steps, not triumphant ones. They'd expected this to be easy, a signature, a handshake, a scared homeowner eager to comply, but I wasn't scared, and I sure as hell wasn't eager. As their convoy rolled away, gravel spitting out behind them, the land went quiet again, but not a peaceful quiet, a waiting quiet, a storm-brewing quiet. That was the moment I knew something with real teeth was coming, and that whatever they planned next wouldn't arrive in daylight. The next morning started like any other, coffee, boots, and the slow creak of an old porch greeting another day, the kind of simple ritual that steadies a man. But peace doesn't last long when someone's decided your land should have been theirs. By 9 a.m., the mail truck didn't just stop at my gate, it lingered. The driver wouldn't look me in the eye when he handed over the stack of envelopes, thick enough to feel like a brick, all bearing the same return address, Serenity Ridge HOA Legal Division. That right there told me everything I needed to know. The envelope on top was bolded in red, Notice of Property Compliance Review. I opened the first letter with a knife, careful, slow, like I was dressing a deer. Inside was a list of violations so ridiculous it felt like satire. Fence height inconsistent with community standards. Livestock containment inadequate. Exterior structures may pose hazard to adjoining properties. Failure to maintain visual harmony. Visual harmony. They really wrote that. I almost laughed. Until I saw the last line. Failure to correct these issues within 14 days will result in mandated county inspection and administrative fines. 14 days. Everything about it was meant to feel urgent, panicked, overwhelming, except I wasn't a man who overwhelmed easily. I opened the next envelope, another violation notice, then another, and another. By the 10th letter, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't enforcement. This was war by paperwork. You don't need bulldozers or sabotage when you can bury a man under documents until he chokes. I stacked the letters neatly on the porch rail, all lined up like little soldiers in the wrong army. A breeze pushed through, rustling them, like even the wind was offended by the nonsense. Now, most folks don't know this, but my father used to say the county courthouse had two kinds of wars, the kind with fists and the kind with forms. Forms, he said, were worse. Fists bruise a man. Forms bury him. As I sorted the last envelope, something caught my eye, a thick one, heavier paper, not HOA, County Planning Department, never a good sign. Inside was a notice stating that Serenity Ridge had filed a petition to review the zoning placement and impact of adjacent parcels. Adjacent parcels, that meant me, specifically me. A paragraph near the bottom was highlighted in yellow. Possible environmental concerns regarding the Marston property may require temporary conditional access for assessment. That word, access, set something cold in my chest. They weren't bluffing anymore. They weren't pretending. They were positioning themselves to walk right onto my land with clipboards and cameras and county backing, not because they had reason, but because they had paperwork. I leaned against the porch post, letters spread around me like vultures circling. My land was still quiet, still mine, but on paper, they were already rewriting the borders. You can fight a trespasser. You can stare a man in the eyes and make him think twice. But a sheet of paper with a county stamp? That's a ghost with teeth. I stood there thinking, slow, steady, until a truck rumbled up the road. Older Chevy, dusty blue, rattling like every bolt was holding on out of loyalty, not strength. It was Earl Talbot, neighbor 2 miles up, an old friend of my father's. He killed the engine, stepped out, and handed me a folded letter. "Got this in the mail," he said. "Thought you'd want to see." It was another HOA notice, this one accusing him of non-permitted livestock interaction. Earl hadn't owned a cow in 10 years. "Looks like they're spreading the net," he said. I nodded, trying to isolate me. Make the whole county believe I'm the problem. He spit in the dirt. "Hell of a strategy, but they don't know you, son." Earl wasn't much for speeches, but sometimes a man only needs a few words. He drove off, leaving dust rolling through the air like smoke after gunfire. I gathered the letters, walked inside, and laid them all out on the kitchen table. Pages and pages of accusations, lies, threats dressed as compliance. And something hit me then, quiet but solid. These weren't random, they were coordinated. Somebody was pulling strings behind the scenes, fast, confident, and desperate. I tapped a finger on the stack. If they were using paperwork as a weapon, then I'd better start loading some weapons of my own. Not bullets, evidence, patterns, tracks that they thought they covered. Someone was about to find out the difference between a man who complains and a man who documents. And I hadn't even pulled out the cameras yet. By the time sundown hit, the letters from the HOA were still spread across my kitchen table like a crime scene I hadn't decided how to solve yet. I stared at them a long time, letting the last of the daylight fade off the paper. Paperwork meant they were scared of being seen, scared of leaving fingerprints, which meant if they were stupid enough to sneak onto my land, they were smart enough to hide their tracks. So I decided to stop looking for footprints and start making them. I grabbed my coat, stepped out onto the porch, and let the night settle in around me. Quiet night, cold, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. Perfect for listening. I headed for the barn, opened the old metal cabinet my dad built back when he still believed the world was a fair fight, and pulled out a box labeled simply storm gear. But inside wasn't rain gear. It was tools of a different kind. 4 trail cameras, older but dependable. 2 motion-triggered floodlights, a thermal sensor I'd bought years ago for coyote trouble, a canister of reflective tracer powder, the kind hunters use when tracking in low light, and a roll of heavy-gauge wire that'd outlast a tornado. I laid it all out on the barn bench like a surgeon prepping for a quiet, necessary operation. My father taught me 2 rules that night I'll never forget. 1. A man who hides in the dark fears the light. 2. Make the dark work for you, not against you. So that's what I did. I started at the southern fence, hung a camera inside a hollowed-out cedar knot, placed another near the cattle gate under a fake birdhouse I carved years ago. Then I wired a small motion bar across the old drainage ditch, the one spot someone sneaky might crawl through thinking I'd forgotten it existed. Next, I sprinkled a light trail of tracer powder along the ground near the weak spots of the fence. Under normal light, it looked like dust. Under UV, though, it screamed like a spotlight. If anyone crossed that fence tonight, they'd glow like a Christmas angel in the courtroom. By the time I finished, the moon was leaning low, hanging pale over the mesquite trees. The ranch looked peaceful, too peaceful. That kind of silence is a liar. A man learns that after enough years living alone. I was halfway back to the house when I heard it. A faint electric hum, high, insect-like, mechanical. A drone. Not the first I'd heard in my life, but the first I'd heard close to midnight. I turned slow, eyes adjusting to the dark. There it was, hovering not 20 yards above the barn roof. Little red light blinking, camera eyes swiveling like it was sniffing for heat. Someone was watching me, watching my property, maybe even watching how I responded. I didn't reach for my shotgun, not yet. Taking down a drone feels good, but catching its owner feels better. So instead I acted like I didn't see it, kept walking, calm, slow, let them feel safe. Half an hour later, back inside the house, I sat by the kitchen window with the lights off. Beside me, the trail cam receiver blinked steady, waiting. At 12:43 a.m., it chirped. One image, then another, then another. I opened them one by one. First photo, a figure jumping the back fence. Hood up, knees bent like they'd practiced it. Second photo, same figure crouched by my north gate, shining a small flashlight into the lock hardware, maybe checking what tools they'd need next time. Third photo, 2 sets of footprints glowing under UV. One fresh from the tracer powder, marked, caught. Then came the fourth photo, the one that made my jaw tighten. The figure wasn't alone. Behind him, through the brush, barely visible, was the shape of a silver SUV parked with its lights off. Same model I'd seen drive by too slow a few days back. Same shape I'd spotted near the ridge last week. Then the fifth photo loaded. And I froze. Because the man in the hood wasn't just scouting, he was planting something, a metal stake, a surveyor's marker, right into my sill. And stamped on the side, clear as sunrise, were the words, Serenity Ridge, Phase 4, Boundary. They hadn't come to trespass. They'd come to erase me, break the line, pretend it was always theirs, rewrite history with a metal pin and a forged map. I leaned back in my chair, slow, breathing deep, letting the anger settle, not burn. Let them dig their hole deep. Let them think they were smart. Tomorrow morning, those stakes would still be there, and I had cameras, proof, UV footprints, and a bad habit of finishing fights other people start. They wanted a quiet takeover. They were about to get noise. I'd already seen the trespasser on camera planting one of those stakes. I'd already seen the UV footprints glowing like guilt. So when morning came, I didn't walk out there expecting surprises. What I expected was confirmation. And sometimes confirmation hurts more than shock. The fog was still hanging low when I reached the first metal pin. I looked at it the way a man looks at a rattlesnake he already killed. Not surprised, just offended it ever got close. The words stamped on the steel were exactly what I'd seen on the trail cam feed. Serenity Ridge, Phase 4, Boundary. No surprise, no revelation, just proof. Cold, shiny proof. I pulled the stake from the ground, not gentle. It made a clean metallic scream as it came loose. The sound of something that did not belong. The anger came slow, not hot, more like a bruise spreading under the skin. Because it takes a special kind of arrogance for someone to walk onto a man's land in the dead of night and leave behind a boundary marker like they were planting a flag on the moon. But the stakes weren't what made the morning heavy. It was the number of them. 8, 10, a full crescent cutting through my pasture, each one placed with the kind of confidence only a liar or a fool could possess. They weren't guessing. They weren't testing. They were mapping. I kept pulling stakes, photographing each one, letting the anger settle in my bones like winter cold. Then I reached the last marker, and that's where everything changed. This stake had something clipped to the top, a laminated sheet, curled a little from the night air. The camera hadn't picked that up, not at the angle I'd installed it. I unhooked it carefully, unfolded it on my knee, and felt the whole world tilt sideways. It was a map, not a sketch, not a rough draft. A finalized layout. Color-coded. Stamped. Approved by someone who had no right approving anything. Across the top, Serenity Ridge, Phase 4 Development Plan. I traced the outline with a finger. There were cul-de-sacs, walking paths, recreational green zones, A community lodge. And the land they were building it all on? My land. Every inch of Phase 4 was printed right on top of my pastures, as if the fences didn't exist, as if my deed meant nothing, as if I'd already disappeared and they were just waiting for the ground to cool. I whispered one word under my breath. Unbelievable. But it wasn't really. Not after everything they'd done so far. What was unbelievable was the stamp in the bottom corner. County review completed, pending final approval. That meant they'd already filed this, already submitted maps, already promised something to someone with money. And they'd done it without owning a square foot of what they were selling. A man can fight trespassers, he can fight liars, he can fight a bad neighbor, a nosy board, or a county pencil pusher. But fighting a deal that's already been made on paper, that's a different kind of war. That's when it hit me, not shock, but clarity. This wasn't harassment, this wasn't pressure, this wasn't negotiation, this was a cover-up. They'd oversold Serenity Ridge, sold Phase 4 before they secured the land, and now they were scrambling like coyotes in the henhouse, trying to make the paperwork match the lie. Every violation notice, every drone, every late-night visit. It all led back to this one truth. If I stayed, they'd lose everything. And people who stand to lose everything don't act rational, they act desperate. I folded the map, slid it into my jacket like evidence in a murder case, and stood there staring across the morning pasture. The fog was lifting now, revealing the land the way it always had been. Quiet, steady, mine. But on someone else's blueprint, it wasn't mine at all. And that's when a different kind of anger settled in. Not wild anger, not lead, sharper, colder, the kind of anger that makes a man think in straight lines instead of raised voices. I whispered to the empty field, "You boys drew the wrong map, and now you're going to answer for every inch of it." I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this. I had proof, I had clarity, and I had something they hadn't counted on. A man who doesn't scare, and a land that refuses to forget. I turned back toward the house with the map tucked under my arm. Phase 4 wasn't just a development plan, it was a confession, and I planned to use every inch of it. By the time dusk settled, I had the Phase 4 map laid out on the kitchen table, weighted down at the corners with 4 river stones my mother collected when I was a boy. That map looked harmless, quiet even, but there was more violence in those printed lines than a fistfight behind a bar. They'd promised my land to someone with money, someone expecting results, which meant tonight, they'd likely try again. So, I made preparations. I walked the perimeter one more time, slow and deliberate, like a preacher checking pews before a storm sermon. The tracer powder I'd sprinkled earlier still looked like ordinary dust, but under UV it would scream like a fire alarm. And tonight, I meant to make it scream. I checked each trail camera, tightened each mount, cleared branches that might trigger false motion. Then I added something new, a small UV flood strip wired under the cattle gate, harmless to the eye, invisible unless triggered. If anyone crawled through that narrow gap, they'd look like a walking constellation. By 11 p.m., the ranch was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind that makes your ears strain and your heartbeat sound loud. I sat on the porch with the lights off, letting my eyes adjust. My father used to say a man can hear trouble 10 minutes before it arrives, if he's willing to listen. Around 12:40, the first sign came. Not sound. Light. A faint blink through the trees. White, sharp, mechanical. A drone. Second one this week. It floated low over the pastures, scanning, the red camera light pulsing like it had a heartbeat. Whoever piloted it was cautious, too cautious. Like they knew they'd pushed their luck last time, but drones don't scare me. People do. At 1:17 a.m., the trail camera receiver chirped softly, a high, fast beep. Then again. 2 triggers, close together, movement. I eased back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the camera feed. There, on the screen, in grainy black and white, 2 figures slipping under the fence at the far western post, both wearing hoodies, gloves, backpacks, professional, prepared, idiots. One bent down, brushing the ground where the tracer powder lay. When he stood up, I saw it, the faint glow of dust along the knees of his jeans. Marked. The second figure moved quick toward the barn, checking the locks, tugging at the feed room door like he expected it to pop open. He didn't realize the new latch was reinforced steel, welded into place. He tugged harder, still nothing. He muttered something. Camera didn't catch the words, but the tone was sharp, impatient. Frustrated men make mistakes, and this one was about to. He moved toward the irrigation shed, crouched beside the control box, and tried prying it open. 2 seconds later, flash! The motion floodlight I'd wired earlier exploded white across the yard. Bright enough to wake the cattle, bright enough to freeze the men in place. The one by the shed scrambled back, blinded, tripping over a hose reel. The other bolted toward the fence, but the UV strip under the cattle gate burst into violet flame the moment he crawled through. For a moment, the world went dark except for one thing. Footprints glowing like blue fire, perfect, clear, inarguable. It wasn't just shoes, it was hands, knees. A streak across his jacket where he'd brushed against the powder. He was glowing like a guilty angel run through a paint factory. The camera captured every frame. The drone above wobbled at the sudden light, then zipped off. Whoever operated it must have panicked. The 2 trespassers fled into the brush, but their glowing footprints trailed after them like breadcrumbs for half a mile. I didn't chase. Didn't need to. I had what I came for. When the ranch grew quiet again, I walked out to the floodlight's reach, bent down, and brushed a patch of glowing dust off the dirt. The prints were perfect. Museum perfect. Courtroom perfect. I'd used tracer powder hunting coyotes. Never thought I'd use it hunting people. But the world changes. And you change with it, or you lose everything. Inside, I saved each photo across 3 different drives. One for me, one for a lawyer, one for insurance in case something accidentally went missing. Then I shut off the lights, let the house settle, and leaned against the window. The trespassers would be waking up right about now, scrubbing their clothes, wondering why their jeans glow like they'd rolled in radioactive chalk. They might get the dust out of the denim, but they wouldn't get out of the videos. And this was just level 1. Evidence was nice, but fear lasts longer. Tomorrow, I stop watching the fence. Tomorrow, I start building a war zone. Morning came slow, gray, and heavy. The kind of morning that makes a man think twice before getting out of his chair. But I didn't have the luxury of thinking twice anymore. My kitchen table looked like a detective's board. Only difference? The detective and the suspect were both me, laid out in neat rows, the Phase 4 development map. Photos of the metal stakes, the video of 2 trespassers glowing like neon ghosts, the drone still frame, the HOA violation letters stacked like gravestones. That first envelope, step aside. Each piece told a different story, but together they screamed one truth. Serenity Ridge didn't just overreach. They gambled, big, and they gambled with someone else's money. Someone with power. Someone who wouldn't appreciate being lied to. I ran a hand over the map again, feeling the smooth laminate. Whoever submitted this to the county had confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you already cashed the check. And that's when it clicked in hard, like a hammer finding the nail. I didn't need to convince Serenity Ridge to stop. I needed to convince their buyer. The people funding Phase 4 weren't fools. They were wealthy, important, and, most importantly, risk-averse. They weren't going to like finding out they'd bought land that wasn't for sale. They weren't going to like knowing they'd been lied to. And they sure as sin weren't going to like being dragged into legal trouble. I pulled a manila envelope from the drawer, thick, clean, never used. It felt heavier than paper should. Inside it, I placed printed photos of the glowing footprints, a USB drive with all camera footage, a copy of the Phase 4 map, a still of the trespasser planting the stake, the original step-aside note, a typed letter I wrote slow, deliberate, without flourish. The letter wasn't long, didn't need to be. You paid for land they never owned. They forged a boundary they knew was false, and they're breaking the law trying to hide it. What you do next determines whether you're a victim or an accomplice. I signed it simply. The actual owner of the Marston parcel. No name, no address, no phone. If Horizon Vista was as smart as their reputation claimed, they'd find me anyway. When the package was ready, I slid it into a second envelope labeled Horizon Vista Land Development Atten, Legal Compliance Division. That should get their attention. Folks with money fear 2 things, lawsuits and looking stupid. This envelope promised both. By noon, I was driving towards Santa Corona, the nearest town large enough to have corporate drop boxes and small enough that nobody knew my truck by name. I parked 3 blocks from the Horizon Vista satellite office. Not their headquarters, just a place where they signed permits, met architects, and schmoozed the county. Perfect. The kind of place where a man could walk in unnoticed, but leave a bomb behind. I didn't go inside, didn't need to. I left the envelope on the front desk with a simple instruction to the receptionist. Legal department, direct delivery. Someone's been lying to y'all. She blinked at the envelope, heavy, thick, impossible to ignore, then nodded slow, like she could feel something wrong inside it. I tipped my hat and walked back into the sunlight. Didn't hurry, didn't look back. A cowboy doesn't need to watch the fuse once it's lit. As I walked down the sidewalk, a breeze drifted through the street, carrying the smell of asphalt and fresh paint from some new office project. Developers love new asphalt. They don't love lawsuits. And Horizon Vista was about to have the biggest one of its life dumped in its lap. Halfway to the truck, I paused, leaned against a lamppost, and watched people flow around me, men in shirts too clean, women on phones making plans they'd forget by evening. A world full of people who thought land was just dirt with a price tag. They had no idea what land meant to a man raised on it, no idea what it meant to fight for it. I climbed into the truck, fired up the engine, and let the old diesel rumble under me. On the drive home, the sky started to clear, clouds pulling apart, sun warming the windshield, like the land itself was waiting for the next move. When I reached my gate, I stepped out, looked across the pasture where the stakes had been planted, and whispered, "You boys wanted a war zone? Fine, but you should have picked a man who scares easy." Inside the house, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Austin area code. I didn't answer, not yet. Let the package do its work first. Tonight, Serenity Ridge would have no idea why their buyer wasn't returning calls. Tomorrow, they'd feel the first crack in the ground beneath their feet. Most men think a war starts with shouting. I've lived long enough to know better. A real war starts in silence, in the space between what you've done and what you're willing to do next. After sending the package to Horizon Vista, I drove home with a strange calm settling in my chest. Not peace, just clarity. The kind a man gets when he finally understands the rules of the game and decides he doesn't care for them. HOA would be desperate now. Desperate men do stupid things. So while they scrambled to explain themselves to the people holding their leash, I prepared for the night. I didn't build a fence. I built a message. The first thing I set up was a fog system I hadn't touched since a prescribed burn training 20 years back. CO2 fog behaves different from normal mist. Denser, low to the ground, rolling slow like it's thinking about who it wants to swallow. I placed the foggers at 3 tight passes along the fence where someone sneaking through would naturally drift. They'd switch on only at night, only when motion sensors whispered for them to wake. Then I dug out 2 low-frequency speakers I'd once used to keep coyotes away from the calving pasture. They don't make sound you can point at. They make sound you can feel. A pressure in the ribs, a nervous flutter of instinct telling you something out there wants you to leave. I mounted them high in the cedar line behind the stalls, angled down just right. Anybody creeping along the fence would feel the hum before they realized where it came from. But the finishing touches were the signs, not the regular keep out signs worn by sun and birdshot. These were freshly printed, bright, official-looking, in a way only bureaucracy can be. Bio-organic decomposition area, mask required. Low oxygen zone, trained hazmat crew only. They didn't mean a thing, just compost piles and empty ground behind them. But fear doesn't need truth. It just needs imagination. By late afternoon, I stepped back and looked across my land. To anyone on the Serenity Ridge side, the old Marston parcel no longer looked like stubborn ranch land. It looked like something dangerous, something off limits, a place where the rules change the second you cross a line. As the sky dimmed, the cattle bedded down. Even the wind dropped quiet, like the ranch was holding its breath along with me. Right around 1 in the morning, the foggers kicked on. A ripple of pale white mist crawled across the ground, sliding over the grass in slow waves. It wasn't thick enough to hide in, but just thick enough to unsettle, like the earth was exhaling something it shouldn't. I watched from the window, lights off, shotgun leaning by the frame, though I didn't plan on using it tonight. This wasn't that kind of war. A minute later, the motion sensor whispered again. The low hum rolled out from the cedars, barely audible, more like pressure than sound, something you feel behind the eyes. And soon enough, shadows appeared at the fence. 2 of them, cautious, moving like men who'd already spent one night running through the dark. They crouched low, stopping when the fog wrapped around their boots. I could almost hear their breathing slow, tighten. One of them took a step back. The other whispered something sharp, a little desperate. Then a floodlight snapped on, just a thin beam across the fog, slicing their shadows long across the grass. They froze. Nobody crawled under the fence. Nobody jumped it. Nobody even tried to test the wire. The low hum deepened, vibrating their jackets. One grabbed the other's sleeve. Both turned, and then they ran. Not walked, not hurried, ran full speed back towards Serenity Ridge like the ground behind them was alive. I watched their silhouettes vanish between the neatly planted HOA trees, swallowed by the uniform glow of their streetlights. The fog drifted on, slow and steady, as if nothing remarkable had just happened. I stepped onto the porch and breathed deep. It smelled like cedar and cold air and victory. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that tells you your enemies are finally starting to understand you. A war zone doesn't always need bullets. Sometimes it just needs a man willing to let fear do half the work. Tonight, the line held without a fight. Tomorrow, Serenity Ridge would feel something new. Not anger, not even caution, but doubt. And doubt is the first crack in a fortress. For the first time in weeks, I slept easy, the fog still drifting outside like a pale guard dog that didn't need feeding. Courtrooms have a smell, old paper, dust, cold air that's been pushed around by vents older than the judge himself. It's a smell that makes most men nervous. Not me. I'd spent my whole life fighting for things people said weren't worth the trouble. Cattle during droughts, fences during storms, and now land against people who thought a boundary could be erased with paperwork. By the time my case was called, Marston v. Serenity Ridge HOA, I'd already seen Darlene Hedden pacing the hallway outside, whispering into her phone, her lipstick smudged like she'd been chewing it. Her lawyer, Stanley Polk, was sweating before we even stepped inside. Polk was the kind of attorney who looked confident only when nobody was watching. The judge, a wiry man named Halford, took his seat and asked everyone to settle. "Mr. Marston," he said, peering over his glasses, "you're representing yourself?" "Yes, sir," I answered. Polk smirked at that, the kind of smirk men make right before they realize the ground beneath them is about to give way. The judge nodded. "Very well. Serenity Ridge alleges you have refused access to land designated under their jurisdiction. You're claiming trespass and fraudulent boundary claims in return." "That's correct." Darlene lifted her chin like a rooster preparing to crow. Judge Halford motioned for Polk to begin. Polk strutted forward, thumbing through a bright blue binder. "Your Honor, this homeowner, Mr. Marston, has repeatedly obstructed our association's right to conduct community development activities. Community development?" the judge interrupted, eyebrows raised. "On his land?" Polk cleared his throat. "With respect, Your Honor, the boundaries are disputed." A murmur rolled across the courtroom. Even the bailiff blinked. My turn. I stood, held up the laminated map from Phase 4, the one I'd pulled from the stake in my pasture. "This," I said, "is the map Serenity Ridge submitted to the county." Judge Halford motioned for the clerk to take it. She delivered it to him carefully, as if it were a snake that might start hissing. His eyebrows climbed higher. "This shows a development project covering your entire western pasture," he said. "Yes, Your Honor, my land." Polk laughed lightly, too lightly. "Your Honor, anyone can print a map. It proves nothing without context." I nodded slowly. "Agreed, which is why I brought the rest." I handed the clerk a USB drive. When the first video played on the courtroom screens, the room leaned forward. 2 hooded men slipping through my fence under moonlight, one kneeling, one planting a boundary stake. Their movements deliberate, their intentions obvious. But the next video? That one cracked the room open. The floodlight burst across the screen, freezing the men in place. Then the UV strip lit up, repainting the dark in shades of ghostly violet. And there they were, footprints glowing like blue fire, hands, knees, a streak across a jacket. The UV powder was unmistakable. No one breathed for several seconds. The judge spoke first. "Polk, your clients entered his land at night?" Polk stammered. We dispute the authenticity," I cut in gently. "No need to dispute anything." I pulled something else from my coat pocket. A small black flashlight. A UV flashlight. "Your Honor," I said calmly, May I demonstrate something? Judge Halford hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead. I walked toward the defense table. Every eye in the courtroom followed. Mr. Polk, I said, would you have your client stand up? Darlene looked ready to faint, but she obeyed. I lifted the flashlight, slow, deliberate. Then I clicked it on. Every light in the courtroom stayed bright, but the judge squinted suddenly. No, I said. Let's do this right. I looked at the bailiff. Sir, could you dim the lights? The judge hesitated. Then, dim them. The overhead fluorescence faded. A low gasp rippled through the gallery. Because under the dim light, the bottom of Darlene's left pant leg glowed faintly, a soft bluish haze, the exact kind of streak a person gets from brushing against tracer powder. Polk sputtered. Your Honor, this must... I clicked the light back off. Your Honor, I don't know if Mrs. Heaton personally walked onto my land that night, but I do know this. I pointed to the screen still paused on the glowing footprints. Someone under her authority did, and they left tracks. The room was so quiet you could hear the bailiff swallow. The judge leaned back, steepled his fingers, and looked at Serenity Ridge like he was examining a diseased animal. This is no longer a boundary dispute, he said. This is trespass, falsified filings, and unauthorized development planning on land the HOA does not and has never owned. Polk wilted. Darlene sagged onto her chair like the air had been punched out of her. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the courtroom door. A clerk hurried to open it, and in walked a man in a charcoal suit with a silver portfolio tucked under one arm. Judge Halford frowned. And you are? The man bowed his head politely. Ethan Calder, representing Horizon Vista Land Development. The blood drained from Darlene's face so fast it was almost art. Calder approached the bench. Your Honor, he said, my client received anonymous evidence this week indicating Serenity Ridge has been selling Phase 4 development rights on land it does not control. We are here to confirm our intention to withdraw entirely from all contracts related to Serenity Ridge. Additionally, we reserve the right to pursue financial damages. A long silence followed. Then the judge spoke softly. Mr. Calder, thank you. You may be seated. The gavel came down like a hammer on steel. Effective immediately, Serenity Ridge HOA is barred from entering or claiming oversight on the Marston parcel. All filings related to Phase 4 are nullified. Any further interference will be met with civil and criminal consequences. Polk collapsed into his chair. Darlene stared straight ahead, hollow. I nodded once. Then I said the only thing I felt was worth saying. Your Honor, I appreciate your time. When the judge dismissed us, the courtroom emptied like someone had opened a chute under the floor. Calder caught up to me near the hall. You were smart to send us that package, he said. I tipped my hat. Just returning the favor. They sent me one first. He smiled, tight, respectful, businesslike. We won't be troubling you again. I know, I said. You're not the ones I was worried about. The week after the hearing passed like a long exhale. For the first time in months, I woke without the feeling that someone was waiting out there in the dark, counting my breaths, measuring my fences, waiting for me to slip. The kind of quiet that used to feel ordinary now felt like a gift I hadn't realized I'd lost. On Monday, I got a certified letter from the county. Not a summons, not a complaint, a simple declaration. Boundary affirmed, HOA jurisdiction void. No signatures from Serenity Ridge, just the county seal and the straightforward certainty of the law. I pinned it to the fridge like a child's good report card. On Wednesday, a sheriff's deputy, older man, polite, hat in hand, came by to ask a few questions about the tracer powder footage. Not accusatory, matter of fact. The county had opened an investigation into Serenity Ridge, financial fraud, false filings, criminal trespass. He didn't name names, but I could guess. Darlene Heaton hadn't shown her face since the hearing, not at HOA meetings, not around town, not even at the Serenity Ridge community garden she used to brag about. Rumor said she'd lawyered up the same afternoon Horizon Vista withdrew their contracts. Rumor also said 2 board members had flipped, turned evidence over to save themselves. HOAs fall apart fast when the money dries up, like ants scattering when the food runs out. On Friday, an official county truck pulled into Serenity Ridge's front entrance. 2 workers climbed ladders and unscrewed the big sign, "Welcome to Serenity Ridge, Phase 1, 4. They left the name. They took the Phase 4. Small thing, but symbols matter. By Saturday morning, I noticed something strange. People weren't avoiding my ranch anymore. Neighbors I barely talked to started slowing their trucks as they passed, giving me a respectful nod, almost apologetic. Like they weren't sure whether to congratulate me or keep distance from a man who'd just taken an entire HOA to court and won. I didn't mind either way. I'd done what I needed to do. That Sunday, near sundown, I saddled my horse and rode the full length of the western fence. Not checking, not looking for trouble, just remembering. The cedar posts cast long shadows, same as they had when my father drove each one into the ground one hot summer decades ago. Every post was hand-cut. He never used pre-made ones. Said a man ought to know the feel of the things that guard his land. I don't know if he ever expected me to fight for it someday, but he'd taught me how to, without ever saying the words. At the northern end of the pasture, I stopped where the last Phase 4 stake had stood, the one with the map clipped to it, the one that started everything. Now there was nothing but a small circle of softer dirt, where I'd pulled it free. Funny thing about land, it remembers. You can tear up fences, plant false markers, draw new lines on a map, threaten, lie, and trespass, but the dirt remembers the hands that belong to it, and it resists the ones that don't. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky the color of old embers. I watched the light travel across my fields, familiar, warm, steady. A coyote barked somewhere far off. Cattle shifted in the distance. Wind brushed the dry grass. The world kept moving, same as always. But I had changed. I'd always believed a man could avoid trouble if he kept to himself. Turns out, trouble doesn't care where you stand. Sometimes it walks right up to your fence and asks you to step aside. And sometimes, if you don't answer right, it climbs over. I turned the horse back toward home, letting him take his time. The night came in slow behind us, gentle, not heavy. Halfway back, the porch light automatically clicked on, my motion timer doing its job. The same system that caught 2 trespassers not long ago now greeted me like a welcome home lantern. When I stepped off the horse and walked toward the gate, I saw the new sign I'd put up myself. Private property, boundary enforced. Not threatening, not loud, not angry, just truthful. And that's all I ever wanted in the first place. As I leaned on the gate, watching the last minutes of daylight disappear, a thought settled in. Quiet, final, unshakable. They tried to take my land because they believed land is just something you buy. But a man like me, we don't own land. We belong to it. I pushed the gate open and stepped inside, boots crunching on gravel, the house warm with lamplight waiting for me. Behind me, the fence line stretched out clean and honest under the stars. A line drawn once, held always. War was over, and the land was mine.